Howdy, and welcome to Brandi's Book Stack. Today, I thought we'd talk about a tag that's going around, created by novels, about how we rate books. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about how I rate books, and hopefully you'll tell me a little bit about how you rate books down in the comments below. So without further ado, let's jump into the stacks. So before we get started, I do want to say that there's been a lot of controversy about this particular tag, particularly from Steve Donahue and Michael K. Vaughan, for the use of a rating scale at all. They feel like it's inappropriate to rate books with a star rating, that this somehow cheapens them. And with all due respect to those two gentlemen, who I do respect a great deal, I disagree. I think that there is value in a rating system. And the reason for that is I feel like, number one, it's kind of like when you were in school. If your teacher didn't grade your work, like if it was something it was just, it just mattered if you turned it in or not, you kind of felt like, well, all my hard work, you know, that didn't really mean a lot to me. Whereas if the teacher put a big A+ at the top, well, that had a lot of meaning. That meant something. That meant on this scale, it meant this to you. So I do really feel like there's value in rating. Also, in the YouTube community, I have heard people wax poetic about a book that they said they loved, it was incredible, and they used a star system and then gave it 3 stars. So that tells me a little something, that even though you talked very kindly about the book, that maybe you didn't really love it as much as your words might have expressed. So I think it is worthwhile. However, I do think that when we rate books, we also need to talk about them in some sort of fashion. So we shouldn't be given a star review without some sort of commentary to go along with it. And when we choose books to read, I think we shouldn't be going on Goodreads and just saying, okay, which book has the highest stars? Oh, this one has low stars. I'm just going to say no way. Because the words can really tell us something. If you're like me and you don't like dour and depressing fiction, you might rate Kafka's The Trial, for example, a 2. Even though that is a well-regarded work of classic literature that many, many people cite as their very favorite book of all time. So you could read the comments and hear, oh, well, the people who rated this a 2 rated it because they found it depressing. And you like depressing books. You like that sort of dour, meaningful fiction. Then maybe that would be the book for you, and vice versa. So I do think that the star rating has some value. I just don't think you should use it in a vacuum. So that's my piece on the subject. So without further ado, let's go on to the list. The first question is, how often do you DNF? I DNF very rarely. I think I should talk a little bit about how my reading style has changed in very recent years before I really tackle that question thoroughly. Before the last few years, and in the last few years, I've started this reading challenge. It's just a personal challenge of my own to try to get through the 100 best-selling books of all time. And I'm using a couple of lists to do that. One from Wikipedia and one from Goodreads. They vary a little, so it is a bit more than 100 books. I think it's around 140. And then I'm reading through the, quote, best books of all time, per Goodreads, who got it from the World Library, who got it from some of the noted authors of today. And when I started that, before I started that challenge, I wouldn't really DNF a book, but I would save for later a book. So I might get a good way through a book, but I typically read multiple books at a time. I would stick with the books that interested me more and then just set the others aside for later. So you see a lot of the books behind me are books I started and then set aside for later because I didn't particularly care for them, but I wasn't ready to give up on them. When I started tracking what I read for these lists I was going through, it really changed my reading style because I began to really focus and stick through every book that I read. Because in reading through those list books, I want to know why. Why did the public find this a bestseller? Why did these noted authors feel like this book was one of the best books of all time? And I feel to really adequately do that, you have to read the whole book. So I'm really trying hard not to DNF any of those. But it didn't just change my style for those books, it changed my style for everything that I read because it increased my focus. And so if that's something you're wanting to do less, DNF less, then I'd say going through a list like I am might be a good way to motivate yourself to do that. So before, like I said, I kind of did a lot of set-asides, but now I would say I DNF hardly at all. In the last 3 years, I've only DNF'd 2 books. One was Dangerous Liaisons by Pierre Laclos, I think is how his name is pronounced. Probably not. I speak no French. But I really felt like that book was just... How do you make a book about sex boring? I mean, this book achieved that for me. Now, part of that is probably because Dangerous Liaisons is an epistolary novel or book told in letter format, and I really hate that format a lot. I feel like it's really clunky, it feels contrived, and I really felt that very strongly in Dangerous Liaisons. And I did something in that book that a lot of people will find very controversial, and that is I did skip and flip through the book, found the major plot points, figured out how the novel would end, might have read the Wikipedia summary, even though I got halfway through it. That way, I can go to bed at night knowing, how that all turned out, and yet I don't have to stick around for that awful writing style that I just didn't care for. So I definitely chose to DNF that one. The other book, and this will be a really controversial opinion probably, is the novel Outlander. I bought that book at the Friends of the Library book sale for 50 cents. I never really felt like it was going to be my particular cup of tea, but I know so many people who really enjoyed that novel that I decided, okay, I'll give it a shot. I probably got about 100 pages into it, and I just felt like it was so boring. It wasn't at all what I expected. I expected a really fast-paced novel that really grabbed your attention but had poor writing. And instead, it was sort of the opposite. The writing wasn't terrible. The plot was just very plodding and slow. And I just wasn't willing to stick through a 1,000-page novel that I just didn't get along with. So those are the 2 that I've DNF'd since 2021, the beginning of 2021. So that's my DNF style. I typically don't. So that kind of goes on into the next question, which is what makes you DNF a book? And I'd say those sorts of things. I have to just not be enjoying it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with DNFing a book. I do tend to be a bit of a completionist. I like to know how things end. I like to get to the end. And plus, there have been some rare books that I didn't get along with in the beginning, and boy, they turned it around at the end. So I really like to give a book a chance before I truly give up on it. So that's my DNF thoughts. So the next question is, do you ever give a 1-star rating? Yes, I do. I do it very rarely, but I do give a 1-star rating. When it comes to the rating scale, for me, the rating is all about my enjoyment of the book overall. It could be a phenomenal book, one that the world considers a classic, critics love, everybody thinks this is the most meaningful book in the world. It could be the best-selling book of all time. Doesn't matter. My rating is how I, Brandi, enjoyed that book. For example, I gave Don Quixote a 3-star rating. I'm well aware Don Quixote is a beloved classic. I can understand and appreciate the impact it had on the culture of the time. But for me, it just drug on a little too long. I think for the people of the time, Don Quixote was probably beloved maybe in part because it was so long. It gave them something to read aloud to one another long before there were sitcoms for people to enjoy. And I think that's kind of how people probably enjoyed Don Quixote, is sitting around the fire reading another episode in Don Quixote's crazy struggles. It would be a character everyone would be familiar with, but as you read a different story, you give you another opportunity to get engaged with those characters. Much like a sitcom works today. But for a modern reader, I felt it was too long. So I gave it a 3-star. So yes, there are books I have given a 1-star. And I'll say the ones that I've given in the last 3 years. I think this is all of them. I gave Zorba the Greek a 1-star. I know that's a really controversial opinion. Mainly because it's so misogynist. And I just didn't feel like the plot moved me at all. I think that sort of theme of, living life to the fullest has been better expressed in many other novels, in a much better way. And the misogyny in it was just terrible for me. Let's see. I also had, most recently, The Ginger Man by J.P. Donlevy. This book I have real problems with. The New York Times had a critic that said it was a raucously comic novel. Who thought that, man? I mean, this is a book about a drunk who treats his wife and infant child terribly and abuses them, tries to kill the baby, sleeps with everything that moves and treats those women terribly. I mean, he socks his wife in the eye I think it's the 3rd chapter, for having the audacity to ask, what did he do with all their money? Why did he spend it all on booze? And why did he rip the house apart when he was drunk? So he socked her in the eye for it. I don't find that funny. And I kind of found that book almost personally offensive. That's why I gave it a 1-star. And then following that theme, The Bridges of Madison County. And I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the author's name right off the top of my head, but that was just, I felt, a terrible book. If you're not familiar with The Bridges of Madison County, this is a novel where a woman who has a loving husband who married her. She's an Italian, and he met her during World War II and brought her home. She married him for a green card, although he doesn't really seem to know that. He thinks she married him for love. She's a good wife to him, has his children, and is a good wife and mom until one day when her husband has taken the kids to another city for a 4-H competition. She decides to start up an affair with the hunky local photographer. And I'm not big on books about adultery. And maybe that's old-fashioned of me. I just kind of feel like, especially in the modern world, divorce is available to you as an option. And I feel like it's just dishonest. If you feel like things are so bad with your spouse that you need to have an affair, well, then divorce your spouse and go find happiness. But don't lie. I just really disliked that book. I kind of disliked what it stood for. It's kind of funny. I think the author did have his own affair. He sort of did the runoff with his secretary kind of thing. And the children in the novel, Bridges of Madison County, are like just love the idea that their mother had this, love affair, which I think is so whack. And I will say the author, his child did not feel the same way. So it's kind of interesting how that happened. But those are some of my 1-star reads over the last few years. So what makes a book a 1-star? Kind of like I mentioned, I think it's my enjoyment, utterly. And to be a 1-star, I really have to actively dislike your book. It's not just so much as I didn't care for it, it didn't do it for me. I have to actually, almost hate something about the book and the message that it gives. And in all 3 of those examples I gave, misogyny in Zorba the Greek, again misogyny in J.P. Donleavy's The Ginger Man, and again the infidelity and just how it's handled in The Bridges of Madison County. Those are some examples of why I gave a book a 1-star, because there was something I just really actively disliked about it. So what makes a 2-star book? A 2-star book is a book I just didn't care for it. It just didn't trip my trigger. I didn't like it. I wouldn't recommend it. That's a 2-star read for me. Like I said, Kafka's The Trial. Usually in the case of a 2-star read, I didn't enjoy it, but I could see that there was some value to the book. And that'd be the case in something like Kafka's The Trial. I just didn't feel like there was a lot of value for me, but I can see how there was value for others, how people could enjoy this book, how it had something to say. What makes a 3-star read? To me, a 3-star read is just kind of meh. It's just kind of there. 3-star reads do what they purport to do. It might be a mystery novel that had a mystery, it was solved. It wasn't particularly interesting or entertaining, but it did what it was sold to do. So let's see, what is a 4-star novel for me? A 4-star novel, something I really like. Usually if it's 4-star or higher, it goes on the shelves. Because I'm probably going to want to reread it at some point. And then a 5-star novel, of course, is the best of the best. The books that I've read and reread, or at least want to read and reread, but haven't got the chance to. Things that, I talk to my husband about at night, even though he doesn't want to hear it. Those kind of books. Usually if one of those books is a classic, I'll be on the lookout for what I call a prestige copy. A copy of the book that's either really beautifully bound and printed, or really old, if it's, an old enough classic. If it's a 5-star, that's what I'm going to want to do. Sometimes I'm going to want to own multiple copies of the book, one for reading and one for beauty. But that's a 5-star read for me. So next question. Do I ever do half stars? Yes, absolutely I do. Because sometimes you can't decide between a 3 and a 4. It's a strong 3 or a weak 4. And you want to give that feedback to, in my case, the folks on YouTube. Or if you're writing it for Goodreads. Unfortunately, Goodreads doesn't have a half star, but most people will put that in the comments if you actually read the comments, which is why it's important to read the comments. Because it gives you that kind of feeling. Well, I would have rated this 3.5, but I couldn't do that. Or I would have rated this, 2.5 instead of a 3, but I couldn't use a half star method. So absolutely, I use half stars. Has your rating changed over the years? Absolutely. Until about 2021, I didn't even track what I read. And then in 2021, I started actually tracking a little bit, and I've kind of increased that tracking as I've gone along. So that has changed as time has gone by. Before that, I just didn't track anything. I just read and enjoyed. Next question. Where do you record ratings? This is where I'm a little bit bad for your typical booktuber. I'm really bad about putting a written rating down anywhere. I do have quite a few Goodreads ratings. I have not put up everything I've read in the last 3 years on Goodreads. I just haven't. I'm lazy and I don't have enough time. And believe it or not, it's faster for me to make these videos and talk about the books than it is for me to say something on Goodreads about it. I do keep a spreadsheet for my list books, the best-selling and the best books of all time that I'm going through for my personal challenge, but I haven't really been putting the ratings down consistently for the rest of my books. And that's something I intend to change, to have a good written system to keep that in. I do have a app called Booksmy, which is where I catalog all the books that I own. I'm a really big fan of this app because it's free and it has a barcode system where you can scan barcodes so you can know exactly what books you have. If it doesn't have a barcode, as many, maybe even most of my books don't, you can do a search online or even enter it manually. That has made cataloging my books possible because I have close to 1,000 books in my collection, so it's a lot to keep track of. When I go out book shopping, I want to know if I have a book or not before I buy something. And before I had that app, I really did buy multiples a lot of the times because I thought, I didn't buy this book, and then I'd find out, oh yeah, you did. Not a sponsor or anything. I just think it's a great app. And it, like I said, it's free, so you can't beat that. It also allows you to export into Excel, so you can do that periodically if you're afraid of the app going down, because I know I sometimes have those fears as well. But I do track. It has a read and then an unread tracker on the app, so I know which ones I've read and I know which ones I haven't read, but not what I've rated them. So that's something I plan to change in the future. All right. The last question on here is, are there any books that you are not comfortable reviewing or qualified to rate? And I would say no, because of what my rating scale stands for. It stands for my enjoyment, not necessarily the quality of the book. This is my subjective opinion about how I enjoyed or did not enjoy a book. So I could read a Shakespeare play and it might not be 5 stars, when of course Shakespeare's pretty highly regarded, but it's about my enjoyment. And hopefully you're watching this channel and you can see my words that go along with those ratings, so that it'll give you an idea whether or not the reason I liked it or disliked it were reasons that you would identify with or not. And we all have different opinions. It's a different world for everyone. So, but read what you like. Don't read just because I said something's good. Read what you like. Read what you enjoy. And that is the whole point of reading, is there's something for everybody. There's something for everyone to enjoy out there. So I hope you find some books that you enjoy. What do you use to rate your books? Do you use a star system or just words? Do you log them down somewhere? Let me know in the comments below. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell. Thanks. Bye.